I used to think that here in South Georgia we had to always wait till November to plant these guys, but now I know that we don't. So we're talking about onions today. Now, I don't really know why, but for whatever reason, there are a few crops. When we do videos on those crops, they just seem to be more popular than other things you can grow in the vegetable garden. One of those is okra. For some reason, okra videos always do really well and get a lot of views. And the other one is onions. There are a lot of people that are curious about how to grow onions, and specifically how to grow big onions. So today we're going to plant some onions, but we're also going to talk about kind of the keys to growing onions. When should you plant them? How should you fertilize them? And what onions need to get really big so we can get those big softball size onions that we all want. So these are the onions that we're going to be planting today. I've got two varieties here. A white onion called Carta Blanca, and then a round sweet onion called Cougar. And I grew these out from transplants in our 338 trays. We can see here, these babies look nice. They're pulling out of the tray. They're ready to go in the ground. I'll talk about in a minute the advantages of growing them in the tray versus buying plants. But I've got about 8 different varieties that I'm planting this year. I started them at different times. So we're just planting a few here and there. That way we don't have to plant them all in one day. But we've got 2 trays here that are ready to go in the ground, and we'll be getting those in the ground today. I got one row that I've already planted, and I'll show you that as well. So before we talk about the advantages of growing your own onion plants, let's talk about why we have to transplant onions to begin with. So onion seeds are really tiny, and they take longer to germinate than most things we grow in the vegetable garden. Usually you're looking at anywhere from 7 to 10 days in ideal conditions to get these seeds germinated, which is a lot longer than most things we grow. And if you were to just go out and direct seed these in your garden, because it takes longer to germinate, what's going to happen is likely your weeds are going to outcompete these guys initially, and you're just going to end up with just this real weedy bed of onions, because you wouldn't be able to weed these guys when they're real small and tender. So you're going to have some weed issues if you just try to direct seed them to begin with. The other thing is the plant spacing. So when we put these onion plants in the ground, we're going to put them anywhere from 6 to 8 inches apart, somewhere along the lines of there. It just depends on whether you're going to thin them out a little later or not. But we're going to put them about 6 to 8 inches apart. And like I said, the onion seeds are really, really small. And it's going to be hard to direct seed a seed that small, that distance, and expect to get a real good stand. So they do a lot better when we plant them as plants like you see here. Now, why should you grow your own plants versus buying onion plants? Here in the last year or two, we have started growing our own onion plants. But for years, we planted onion plants that we bought. You can buy onion plants from several places online. You can also, purchase them at your local feed and seed store. And buying plants is definitely probably easier, but there are some disadvantages to it. So I'm not sure buying plants is cheaper. I think if you've got the setup here, growing your own plants is going to be cheaper. The other thing is, buying plants, when you buy them, you only get a certain variety that feed and seed store or that online vendor has. When you grow your own plants, you can pick whatever varieties that you want to grow. You're not at the mercy of whatever that onion plant grower grew that year. So you can grow a lot of different varieties that we have on our website from seed that you can't find anywhere else. The other thing is the health of the plant and how quick it takes off. So we did some experimentation last year and did a side-by-side comparing onion plants we grew in trays versus plants we bought. And the ones that we grew in trays started growing immediately after we put them in the ground. They grew a lot faster, and they just completely outpaced those onion plants we bought. Now, that's not to say you can't grow great, big, nice onions from buying plants, but I think you'll have even better success with growing your own plants. And one of the reasons they do so much better when you put them in the ground is these guys here are in soil, and we're going straight from soil to soil. When you buy plants, they have been pulled out of the ground. A lot of times they trim the tops off, and so they've dried out a little bit. They've been out of the ground for at least a few weeks, and then when you get them in the mail or you go pick them up from the feed and seed store, you may not be planting them immediately because it may be too wet or something like that. So there's going to be some time there where those plants are stressed and not in the ground. Whereas here, we never stress the plant. We take them right from this seed starting mix, put them into our garden soil, and they take off and start growing really fast, really quick. So which is right for you? Growing your own plants or just buying plants? Well, it just depends on your situation. If you have a place where you can grow out transplants, if you grow other transplants like maybe broccoli or cabbage or stuff like that, and you have a seed starting room or a seed starting space or even a greenhouse, yes, growing your own plants is definitely best for you. If you don't have a place to grow transplants, or maybe you just need a few, like a little bundle, maybe just 12 onion plants or so, then buying plants may be your best option. We certainly won't be using all these plants in this tray today. We're just going to be planting one row of each variety. We mainly grow them out like this just as a kind of a quality check on our germ rates and stuff, just to make sure our seeds are good. It's just kind of our own measure of making sure we're sending out quality seeds. So if you have the means to grow your own transplants, grow your own onion plants, definitely you should be doing so. If you don't, you buy the plants and do just fine. We grow them out in these trays right here that we have on our site, which are 338 cell trays. You don't need a big cell to grow an onion plant, and a lot of these cells have more than one seed. I'll give you an example here. So there's 2 onion plants in that cell there, and you can easily just tease them apart and plant them individually. You don't want to plant them together like that because you're not going to make a very big onion on either of those plants, so we do kind of tease them apart. Now you could grow these in a big tray that didn't have cells in it or dividers in it, and just kind of scatter the seeds along there and then just pluck them out of there when they're ready. You can also grow them if you got like a container or a raised bed. You can scatter the seeds in there, grow your onion plants really thick, and then pluck those plants out of there and then stick them along the row in the garden where you're eventually going to grow them out. The only thing about doing it in a container or a raised bed is that you're going to have some level of weed seeds there. And like I said, these are slow to germinate. And so your weeds may outcompete them a little bit in the beginning, and it may end up becoming a little weedy. You should still be able to see the onions so you can pluck them out of there. Growing them in a seed starting mix, a sterile seed starting mix like we do in these trays, we don't have to worry about any weed pressure, and our plants don't have to compete with any weeds. And when they're ready to go on the ground, it's really easy to just grab them from these trays. We'll just grab a bunch of them at a time and stick them in the ground. So we covered the topic of why you should grow your own transplants, or maybe why you should buy your own onion plants. Now I want to talk about growing the onions themselves and the 3 most common mistakes we see that cause people not to grow big onions. Number 1 is simply you gotta grow the right onion varieties for your area. So there are 3 general types of onions. You have short day onions, intermediate day onions, and long day onions. And that distinction is made based on when that variety starts its bulbing phase. So onions have 2 different growing phases. They have a vegetative phase where they're producing all those green leaves, and then when the day length reaches a certain length, then those onions start bulbing, and that bulb starts increasing. You don't get any more vegetative growth. So short day, intermediate day, and long day, what that means is the plants are going to start bulbing at a different day length. For example, short day onions, which we grow here in the south, start bulbing when day length reaches about 10 to 12 hours. And that's going to happen earlier in the year, around January or so, I think, January or February maybe. Intermediate day onions are going to start bulbing when day length reaches 12 to 14 hours. And long day onions are going to start bulbing when day length reaches 14 to 16 hours. We have a chart on our website that shows you basically, depending on where you live, which varieties you should grow. Should you be growing short day, intermediate day, or long day? Long day onions are for those people in the northern part of the country. Intermediate day are for those people in the middle. And short day onions are for those people down south, like ourselves here in Zone 8B in South Georgia. So you've got to make sure the variety you grow corresponds with whether you should be growing short day, intermediate day, or long day. And we have all of our varieties separated by short day, long day, or intermediate day on the website, so it makes it really easy for you to find which ones you should be growing. If you try to grow a long day onion down here in the south, what's going to happen is you're just going to make a bunch of vegetation. You're never going to make a bulb, really, because we don't ever get to 14 to 16 hours of day length down here. You know, in the summer up north, their days are a lot longer than down here. Now, there are some areas where if you're on the edge of the short day and intermediate day area, you could plant either. Or if you're on the edge of the intermediate day, long day area, you could plant either. But if you're kind of in the middle of either of those areas, you probably just want to stick to whatever variety it says, or whatever type of onion it says you should plant. So once you determine whether you should be planting short day onions, intermediate day onions, or long day onions, then you need to figure out when you're going to plant them. And we also have this information on our site. If you're growing intermediate day or long day onions, you're going to wait until late winter, early spring, depending on when that happens in your area, to get those in the ground. If you live in a short day region like we do, you can plant them in the fall and do what we call overwinter the onions. Now, not every person or not every short day area can do this, and I'll tell you kind of the restrictions on this. So onion plants can tolerate temps down to about 20 degrees as long as those temperatures aren't sustained. I've seen them survive 17 degrees down here, but it was only 17 for an hour or so, and then it warmed up later that day. So if you don't regularly get below 20 degrees, you can overwinter your onions like we do. And if you're growing short day varieties, you'll make lots bigger onions, or much bigger onions, if you do overwinter them and plant them in the fall. And you know, we planted them, usually we've always tried to plant them in November, early mid-November, just try to get them in the ground sometime in November. I planted them as late as December and did fine. Last year I did some testing and planted them late October like it is now today, and did just fine. So I would say anywhere from late October to early December, if you're going to overwinter onions, you're fine at getting them in the ground then. And if you're growing your own plants, you can expect the plants to take about 5, maybe even 6 weeks or so to be ready from when you plant them in the trays to ready to go in the ground. So if you live in an area that doesn't get too hot, you should definitely overwinter your onions. If you're in the northern range of the short day area, intermediate or long day, you're going to wait till late winter, early spring to get your onions in the ground. Now let's talk about reason number 2 why some people may not be able to grow big onions, and that is water. So onions are heavy feeders. We'll talk even more about what that means in a little bit, but one part of that being a heavy feeder means they like a lot of water, almost as much as corn, I'd say, maybe even as much, not even more. They need a lot of water, and the more water you give your onions, the sweeter they're going to be. If you like real sweet onions, make sure you give them plenty of water. So if you don't give your onions plenty of water, you're not going to grow a lot of vegetation during that vegetative phase, and as a result, you're not going to get a very good bulb during that bulbing phase. So keeping the water to them is very, very important. So you want to have some type of irrigation for your onions, so you're not just counting on Mother Nature to give them all that water they're going to need. Now you can do this with an overhead sprinkler. Problem with the overhead is you're going to be watering a lot of these spaces between the rows. You're going to have a lot more weed pressure. It's just going to be a little more work as far as keeping everything clean. So I like to plant my onions on buried drip irrigation, or what some people call subsurface drip irrigation. So we bury the drip irrigation, and then we plant the onions either on top or alongside that drip tape there, just depending on if we're doing a single row or double row. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Here's a row I planted just a few days ago. This is a variety called Plethora. This is a Granix or more flattened style short day sweet onion. And these guys are looking pretty good. I just did a single row of those, so I just planted those right on top of that drip tape there. So the drip tape allows us to feed them very, very well. Sometimes once they get up and going, I'll let this stuff just run overnight. They can soak up the water really, really good. They like it. And with the drip tape, we're only putting water right there where the plants need it. We're not watering these gaps between the rows. It just helps us keep the plot cleaner. We conserve water, and we have nice weed-free onion plot. All right, so let's start getting some of these babies in the ground here. So we've got our buried line of drip tape here, and this is only buried, see, there it is right there, so just a couple inches deep. And in the past, we were running a small scale market farming operation here, and I would plant these things on double rows because I was really trying to maximize the space. We're trying to grow enough onions to sell, and so I wanted to plant as many as I could in a given space. So we'd plant them on double rows. I'll show you kind of what that looks like. So we plant on this side of the tape and on this side of the tape. And we just go along here. And I would initially put them about 4 inches apart, 4 to 5 to 6 inches apart. And then, let me plant one more so I can kind of give you a better idea. So I'd plant them this thick on both sides here, a double row. And then once, kind of right before these things started bulbing, or once the bulbs got about 1/4 in diameter, I would come in here and pull every other one, and we'd sell those as green onions. Then we'd leave the rest of them to enlarge and become big baseball or softball size onions. I'm still going to plant them thick, but I'm not going to plant them on a double row this year. This year I'm doing more trial stuff instead of growing enough to sell. So I'm growing 8 different varieties here so I can compare them. So I'm just going to plant a single row because I don't need that many onions this year since we're not selling any. So in this case, I'm just going to plant right on top of the tape, or kind of right to the side of the tape. Still going to plant them pretty close together because we do enjoy some green onions before these things get really big. So we'll want to come in here and pull every one of these and enjoy them as green onions. So in this case, I'm just going to put them along the row like this and plant a single row of them. You can do it however way you'd like to do it. If you want to grow a bunch of onions, the double row works great. I will say with the double row, it is a little tougher to weed them once the plants get larger. A lot of times that foliage will shade out this area in the middle. A single row is a little more easier to manage weed wise, but you don't get as many onions per square foot as you will with a double row. So do whatever works for you. And one more thing here, I won't include this as one of my 3 common mistakes, but just a little extra tip. Don't plant these guys too deep. You can see here where kind of that soil block is sitting there right above the white part of the onion. Don't plant it no deeper than probably where my thumb is. Right there. A lot of people will plant them deep and then pull dirt away from them later. But if you don't plant them too deep to start with, you don't really have to do that. So no need to put them way deep in the ground. Just kind of cover that white portion of the plant and you'll be good to go. All right, all right, all right. We got them in the ground there. A row of Cougar and a row of Carta Blanca white onions to complement this row of Plethora that we already planted. We then got my drip tape going here to give them guys some water. They were leaning over a little bit. That soil was pretty dry. So we're gonna go ahead and give them plenty of water to get them going. Now I have these on a 3-foot row spacing, which some people would say is a little too wide for onions. Like I said, we're doing a trial here. So I got 5 more varieties to plant. And so I just want to be able to keep it nice and clean in here so we can really compare these varieties to one another. That's why I'm giving them a little extra room, just so I've got plenty of room to get in there and work and try to keep the weeds to a minimum. Some people will come in here and put straw down around these plants for weed suppression. I tried that last year. Wasn't a big fan of it, but if you like doing that, it does work pretty well for keeping the weeds down. We'll just use our wheel hoe and a few little hand tools and keep the weeds under control. And these things should take off just as soon as we start giving them some water here. And now to most common onion mistake number 3. And that has to do with fertilization or giving them the right amount of nutrients. I mentioned earlier that onions are heavy feeders, which means they like a lot of water. They also like a lot of nutrients. And especially later on in their growth cycle, still in the vegetative phase though, they like plenty of nitrogen. So we fertilize onions like this. Early on, we're going to give them a complete fertilizer. Something like our complete organic fertilizer I'll show you in a minute. We can inject some of our 20-20-20 through that drip. Some people will use a granular 10-10-10 and till it into the soil prior to planting. But you want to give it a balanced or complete fertilizer there with kind of equal amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That potassium and phosphorus is going to help that root development initially and kind of help those plants get up and going really well. Once that happens, probably about a month or so after planting, then we'll switch just to straight nitrogen. We'll give them some of our ammonium sulfate. Onions like some additional sulfur, so that helps. And we'll just feed them nitrogen all the way up until the bulbing phase. Now, how do you know when that bulbing phase starts? Well, you'll start to see the ground around your onion plant start to crack, and you know the bulbing phase has started then. That's when you want to cut off the fertilizer to the onions. Don't fertilize them during that bulbing phase. So this vegetative phase is when you need to be opportunistic in feeding those onions, maximizing that vegetation, because that's what's going to produce that big bulb in the end. So as far as this plot goes, we came in here a few weeks prior to planting and tilled in a significant amount of good gin trash compost, which is pretty high in nutrients. We put about 2 or so tons per this 1,000 square foot plot here, and you can see that black stuff out there. That's that good black gold compost we put in here. And so that will feed those plants, but it takes a little while to convert over because it is organic. That's the case with any kind of organic fertilizer. It takes a little while to break down those big organic molecules and get them to where they can be used by the plant. Now, another option is to use this stuff right here, our complete organic fertilizer, which is a pelleted hen manure. And you can take that and you can till it into the soil prior to planting, put it in your planting furrow there, or you can come along and sprinkle it alongside these plants here and just lightly cultivate it into the soil with a hoe or something. So that's an option there. Just know that if you're using strictly organic methods like that, you just have to plan ahead, and you're going to have to give this stuff a little bit of time to convert over so the plants can absorb it. If you're needing a quick shot, then you want to go with something like this, our 20-20-20, which you can inject into this drip system, or you can just dissolve some in a bucket and pour it alongside the plants. That stuff is water soluble. It's going to give it a nice quick shot and help that growth early on. So if you want to be organic about it, you can do that, just plan ahead, or you can go with some 20-20-20 and give them a quick shot. Either way works. So just to recap here, if we take our 3 most common onion mistakes and turn those into positives. Number 1, make sure you plant the right varieties for your area, whether that be short day, intermediate day, or long day onions, and try to get them in the ground as soon as your temperatures will allow. That's going to make bigger onions doing it that way. Number 2, give them plenty of water. Whether it's overhead or you want to do it really effectively with the drip system, give them puppies plenty of water. Number 3, they need plenty of nutrients. Feed them well. Whether you do it organically or with a synthetic blend like our 20-20-20, either way works. But just make sure you give them plenty of nutrients, a complete blend initially, and then switch to just a nitrogen source after that, right up into that bulbing phase starts. And I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on this allium plot as we finish out the planting here. So I have 5 more varieties of onions we're going to be putting in here, and then we're going to put 2 rows of elephant garlic on the end. So I'll keep you updated as to the progress of that and how these varieties are looking as they grow, and we'll compare them and kind of see the differences between all 8 short day varieties that we're planting here. I'll put some links below to all of our onion varieties so you can go pick up the ones that are right for you, whether it be short day, intermediate day, long day, red onion, white onion, sweet onion, flat onion, round onion. We've got them all. If you enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring that little bell so you get notified every time we come out with a new video. And if you did enjoy this one, check out these other onion videos right here. I think you'll really enjoy those as well. We'll see you next time.